Good morning, everybody. My name's Sam Monaghan. I'm the Chief Executive of MHA, and welcome to this annual Walter Hall seminar. I'm really pleased you've been able to join us. I'm aware that some people will be joining in the next minute or so as we start our seminar for this year. But I just want to make a few opening comments before we kick off, and to also introduce our three guests for the seminar this morning. So, Walter Hall Memorial Seminar. I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to make it. The Reverend Walter Hall was the person who founded MHA Methodist Homes 80 years ago in a mission to improve the quality of life for older people, and in a time before the creation of our welfare state. Today, MHA is the largest charity care provider for old people in the UK, and as the only provider to offer connected care and support through specialist care homes, thriving retirement living communities, and vibrant community groups, we're continuing Walter Hall's mission to inspire the best support and well-being at every stage of later life. As a national charity, we speak up for older people and advocate for the incredible work of the people who work round the clock to support them. We seek to influence policy and practice at a local, regional, and national level on issues that impact people in later life, such as loneliness, well-being, finances, housing, health and social care, and obviously workforce issues. We want to be an authoritative voice on ageing, informed by what older people have told us, and of course the experience of those who provide our services. As we approach the general election this year, we are acutely aware that social care isn't featuring at the forefront of the political agenda. As part of our campaign work, we want to use the discussion today to understand some of the ways that we could encourage that debate more and increase awareness of the social care sector. I want to be clear at this point that while we will be campaigning for social care to be on the agenda for the general election, as a charity, there are obviously strict rules about what we can and cannot do or say, and it goes without saying that we don't endorse any political party or candidate. Our guests today will explore how the care sector is viewed by the general public, our government, and key decision makers in that run-up to the election. We'll talk about what we can do to ensure social care and the care professional workforce are fairly represented in manifestos and in policies, and that the key issues facing the sector are debated and understood. It's a tall task, I know. We want social care to be top of the political agenda, and we want voters to understand the issues that are now or will be in the future pertinent to them. So where do we start, I hear you ask? Well, thankfully, that's not for me to answer today. That's going to come from our fantastic guests who will address their comments to us and enable you to pick up questions later on. There's going to be a chance for you to ask questions throughout the event, so please do add these to the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screens, and we'll address as many as we can with the panel over the time that we have remaining at the end of the session. So I'm thrilled to have the three guests with us that we do today, who can all offer different perspectives and insight. First, and our opening speaker will be Kieran Pedley, who is Research Director at Ipsos, a global company in market research. Kieran's going to open our session today with his expertise on public opinion, polling and political agendas. Following Kieran's talk, we'll be joined in a discussion panel by Julia Mwaluke, Vice President of Unison, one of the UK's largest trade unions. Julia is a support worker and activist who's campaigned on issues of fair pay for care workers, the ethnicity pay gap, safe staffing levels, and fighting racism in the workplace. And then we're also joined by my colleague, Abby Williams, who is the home manager of MHA Hall Grange, our care home in Croydon, London. Abby has over 20 years' experience in the social care sector and has held various managerial, commissioning and caring roles. She's got a degree in health and social care and a master's in health and hospital management. Abby's passion for caring grew as a child and continues to be the driving force for her in terms of her ongoing achievements and work within the sector. So we're in for a fascinating discussion today, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from all our very knowledgeable and experienced guests. So without further ado, Kieran, I'm going to hand over to you, and if you'd like to put your slides up onto the screen as well. Thank you.
Hopefully everyone can see that. Thank you, Sam. Do shout if you can't see those slides.
They're good. They're good. They're good.
No, thank you, Sam, for those opening remarks. I'm very much looking forward to being part of this event alongside Abby and Julia as well. Today, my name is Kieran Pedley. I'm Director of Politics at Ipsos. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes or so on some of the issues that Sam raises. Effectively, there's going to be two parts to this, these remarks, to this presentation. The first half will be talking about the general lay of the land politically, not necessarily focusing on social care, but just sort of giving everyone an overview of where we are as we head into general election year. But then the second half of the presentation, we'll be looking at specifically public opinion on social care, very important issue, close to my heart, with a close family member suffering from dementia and using some of the services such as the MHA provide. So what I want to try and do today is to tie some of those issues together so that can facilitate a good discussion at the end. So let's start with the political then, the lay of the land, if you like. So first of all, where do we stand? Well, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that we have Labour convincingly ahead in the general election polling. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the polling average with Sky News last week. So not necessarily Ipsos's numbers alone, although our lead this month was 22 points for Labour. The average is 20. There are differences with different pollsters, and we could talk about that in the Q&A for those that are interested. But generally speaking, a very convincing lead for the Labour Party at the moment. And why is that? Well, fundamentally, when we ask the public whether they think the government is doing a good or bad job on the issues that matter most to them, it's a pretty negative report card. So there are 4 issues that consistently top the voters' list of priorities in the past year: the NHS, managing immigration, dealing with the cost of living, and managing the economy. And these tend to vie for top spot. On the left-hand side, you can see that 8 in 10, 80% think that the government's doing a bad job improving the NHS. A similar number on immigration. 77% think the government's doing a bad job dealing with the cost of living, and 68% think the government's doing a bad job managing the economy. For context, when the Labour Party lost the 2010 general election, 59% thought Gordon Brown's government were doing a bad job managing the economy then. So I guess unwelcome context for the current Conservative government. And something that I do emphasise at these sorts of talks in different sectors is that 64%, almost 2/3 of the public, disagree that the current competent is an accurate description of the current government. Now, people often say, well, of course, people don't like governments. Politicians tend to be unpopular here. And, you know, how surprising is that figure? So 18%, less than 1 in 5, thinking that the current government is competent. Well, in the summer of 2020, granted around the time of the maybe the rally around the flag effect of the pandemic, 4 in 10 thought Boris Johnson's government was competent then. So it can be done in terms of public perceptions of the government being competent. Right now, that is not the case. And so what you've got is the public thinking the government are doing a bad job on their priorities, but also lacking confidence in their ability to turn that around. And I think the key point as well is that Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister is not moving the dial. So what you can see on screen here is the percentage that agree or disagree that the Conservative government deserves to be re-elected. And this question in particular goes back to sort of the autumn of 2021. So what you can see is that when Rishi Sunak took over in October, late October 2022, his first rating as Prime Minister had 61% disagreeing that the Conservatives deserved to be re-elected and 19% agreeing that they did. In January of this year, those figures are virtually unchanged, with 6 in 10 disagreeing and 19% agreeing. So no real sense, forget voting intention polling for a moment. I've explained to you that obviously Labour are 20 points ahead, but there's no sense in the underlying figures of any warming of public opinion towards the Conservatives. And a quirk of the system, if you like, is that actually when we look at the individual leaders, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, their personal poll ratings are almost the polar opposite of Boris Johnson's and Jeremy Corbyn's going into the 2019 general election. So right now, Rishi Sunak has a -46 net satisfaction rating, which is simply a score created by subtracting the 66% that are dissatisfied with the job he's doing as Prime Minister from the 20% that are satisfied. So obviously you'd rather be net positive if you can. He's on -46, very similar to Jeremy Corbyn's net satisfaction rating in December of 2019. But what's interesting is that Keir Starmer's -18 is very similar to Boris Johnson's -20 at that time. So no one particularly popular here, but the relative position of the party leaders has flipped in that time. And for what it's worth, in 2019, we know the Conservatives won a fairly convincing majority at that election. Obviously, time will tell if that will be the reverse situation this time. So I think the clue in the underlying figures is that the public want change, but there are some doubts that Labour can deliver that. So 77% told us in September, ahead of party conference season, that they felt that Britain needs a fresh team of leaders. But of that 77%, less than half, 42%, were confident that Labour could provide that leadership. So you often hear news commentators and pundits talk about doubts about Labour. There's certainly evidence of that in the data. Another example of that, which I like to share with people, is that we track whether the Conservatives and Labour are seen as fit to govern over a period of time. So this particular chart goes back to 2011. And you can see a bit of a spoiler alert in September of last year, Labour being 13 points ahead of the Conservatives. That doesn't quite tell you the whole story. So when we look at the picture for the Conservative Party over the last decade and a half almost, up until the 2019 general election, you consistently saw half, sometimes more, agreeing that the Conservative Party were fit to govern. And going into that 2019 general election, 46% felt that that was the case. But this Parliament, that has cratered to the point where it's now 1 in 5, 21%. So Labour, obviously 13 points ahead, as I've indicated. But when you look at their scores over the past decade, other than it falling somewhat in the aftermath of the Brexit vote, hasn't really been a substantial change. Now, elections are, whilst it's a multi-party system, somewhat binary in the sense that either there'll be a Labour or a Conservative government of some kind. So in many ways, if Labour goes into the general election with that lead, they'll take it. But I think there is some evidence in the data that Labour's lead is as much about or more about Conservative weakness than Labour's strength. That being said, I don't want to try and create a cliffhanger of this election out of a 20-point Labour advantage. One of the most common questions I get when doing presentations like these is how likely is a Conservative Party comeback? So we can never be certain. All elections are different, of course. But one of the ways to try and answer that question is to look at what's gone before and to see and look at precedent and what that tells us about the future. So what you can see on the right-hand side of this chart is the polling lead for the Conservatives or Labour with Ipsos a year before the general election and then the eventual result. And on the right-hand side, you can see the shift towards the government in that time. So that might be Labour or Conservatives, depending on who was in office at that moment. What you can see is in 5 of the last 10 general elections, there has been a shift of 10 points or more back towards the government in the final year. But that doesn't happen by accident. That happens when there's a significant public reappraisal of what they think about the party leader, the Prime Minister, what they think about the competence of the government, and what they think about their record on the key issues. The lowest net satisfaction government score a governing party has received and then gone on to win is -49. Rishi Sunak's government is currently at -65. So for there to be this shift, there needs to be a dramatic reappraisal of the government's record and its future prospects by the public, because it should be said that if the polls have shifted by 10 points or more in the final year, 5 times out of 10, that obviously means that in 5 times out of 10, they haven't. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll notice that if Labour are 20 points ahead, even the most generous of comebacks here in 1987, a 17-point shift wouldn't necessarily keep the Conservatives in office. But I think the key point here is that polls can shift dramatically in the final year. And so that can have a dramatic impact on the nature of the government we get next time, even if you think that the party that leads the government is already decided. I would encourage people not to think that, but things can change quickly. Where does social care fit into all of this? Well, what about the issues? Well, the first thing I want to really emphasize, the context of this election is that people are in a very pessimistic mood. And people always say to me, yes, we know that, Kieran, we know that, that's obvious. But I really want to stress that point. In July 1998, 4 in 10, 40% thought Britain was getting worse as a place to live. In and around the time of the financial crash, 71% thought Britain was getting worse as a place to live, whereas last summer, 76% told us that they thought, of the public told us they thought Britain was getting worse as a place to live. And I always say to juniors when we're doing training on statistics that if you can get 7 or 8 out of 10 of people you stop in the street to agree on something, then that's a pretty damning consensus. It's quite rare. And the fact that almost 80% think that things are getting, Britain's becoming a worse place to live is the context in which this next general election is about to take place. So where does social care fit into all of that? So our monthly Ipsos Issues Index asks people in their own words to tell us what they think the most important issues are facing the country. And you'll see that I alluded to earlier that the cost of living, the NHS, the economy and immigration tend to vie for top spots. So in the top left-hand corner, you can see our January figures among all. Now, it's important to say this is a spontaneous question. We don't give people a list. We ask them in their own words to tell us, and then we code that into different themes to see what they say. So 31% overall saying the NHS is the most important, or healthcare generally is the most important issue facing the country. Only 2% spontaneously mention the aging population and social care for the elderly. Now, there's an important context to that, which I'll come to in the subsequent slides. But the point is that spontaneously, it's hard to get social care top of people's minds. What you can see elsewhere is how this tends to shift by age, whereas the NHS and healthcare becomes more important the older the population is. The aging population, social care for the elderly doesn't really move. But there is context to this, and the main context there is that people tend to conflate what the NHS and social care. So we ask 2 statements: was it true or false that the NHS provides the majority of social care services for older people? 31% think that that's true, 51% think it's false. Is it true or false that social care services are generally free at the point of need? 38% think that that's true, 45% think that that's false. So whilst by no means people aren't 100% wrong, there is a lot of confusion out there about where the NHS stops and where social care starts. So that is probably, well, is the context of those numbers I've just shown you. Difficult to get social care top of people's minds, but also to some extent people do associate that with the NHS and healthcare more generally. So in many ways, that might be the opportunity to, when we give people a list of different aspects of or different areas that they think should be prioritized to receive more public money, we can see that the NHS and healthcare generally is top with 56% saying that that should be prioritized. But 25%, 1 in 4, say social care for older people, alongside other issues like housing, social services for children and vulnerable adults, the police, and so on. And there's a long tail here. But there is a recognition when you prompt people that there's a problem and there needs to be more money for the social care sector, even if people do confuse it with, as I say, the NHS generally in their minds. As is the case with a lot of life at the moment, as I've alluded to a moment ago when I talked about 76% thinking Britain was becoming a worse place to live, there isn't a lot of confidence in the ability of the social care services in the UK to provide care to those that need it. So 4 in 10 are very or fairly confident, 53% are not at all or not very confident. And confidence decreases as you get older. So 7 in 10 of those aged 55 plus, or 55 to 75 in the case of this poll, are not very confident or not confident at all that social care services can provide the care that's needed. Why is that? Well, we asked those people that weren't confident, which are the following reasons, if any, explain your answers. So the 2 that stood out were a perceived shortage of staff and a lack of public funding for care. But other issues were on the public's minds as well. Lack of staff with the appropriate skills or training, and also a lack of personal funds to pay for the care needed. So there is a recognition, even if there is a confusion about the sector as a whole, there is a recognition that it faces significant challenges. However, one of the other challenges from a policy perspective is that people aren't particularly preparing for their own personal futures when it comes to this. So we asked people before today, to what extent had you thought about preparing financially to pay for social care services that you might need when you're older? Just 4 in 10 said they thought about that a great deal or to some extent. And of that, only 7% have thought about it a great deal. And then when we asked to what extent are you already preparing financially for social care services you might need when you're older, and the number, as you might expect, drops because thinking about something and doing something are different things. 30% say that they're already preparing, but only 5% say a great deal. It does vary by age, of course, but these sorts of figures remind me a lot of the work that I've done in the pension sector, where it's quite difficult to get people to think about these things unless they've had a personal experience related to it, or as it becomes more on the horizon for them personally. So I've said there's quite a lot of pessimism there, I suppose. Lots of things to chew over, in the sense of getting people to understand the nuances of the difference between what the NHS provides and what the social care sector provides. Getting people to understand some of the challenges around it, how they might be addressed, but also getting people to prepare themselves. But there is a sort of a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, if you like, in an exercise we did related to the NHS. This is called a max diff exercise, which I won't explain in too much detail. It's a research approach where we take a number of different solutions, 11 policy solutions here, and we ask people to choose between them which ones they think will have the most impact on addressing the challenges the NHS faces. So the way you do that is it's a statistical tool where on screen the respondent might see 4 at a time, randomized, and they've got to pick the most important one that they think will have the biggest impact on helping the NHS to address some of its challenges. And then we do some statistical magic at the back end to work out what the most important one is. And we do it that way for some of these areas, because if you just ask people how important are some of these different topics, like building more hospitals, or giving patients more choice, or using private hospitals to take on some of the slack, then people will say all of these things are important. But what's interesting is that the number one solution the public came up with here was increasing capacity in social care, i.e. more places in care homes, so that people that need social care can leave hospital when they're ready. So there is a recognition, when you prompt people, of the link between some of the challenges the NHS faces, which are certainly top of mind, and also some of the issues that the social care sector faces, which may be less so. So some suggestions there that linking the two as much as possible may help campaigners in this area. So some final thoughts from me before I hand over to some of the other panelists. The first is that on the politics of this, politically Labour is ahead, and the idea that it's time for change appears to have taken hold. But a lot can happen between now and polling day, so the exact nature of the next government is as yet undecided. Not that it's ever decided this far out, but even if you think that in all likelihood there will be a Labour government after the next general election, the composition of that government, the exact nature of it, is by no means a foregone conclusion. So that's something for the sector to think about. Social care as a topic or as an issue competes with other issues, as we know, for public attention. And it's also often misunderstood. So it's common for the public to conflate the NHS and healthcare with social care and misunderstand how it's funded to their own detriment, frankly, and waiting until it's too late. Yet there are concerns about the sector, and particularly around funding and staff shortages that could hinder confidence in the sector in the future. So there's a recognition of the problem, even if there isn't a very clear understanding of it or the nuances of it. But like I say, the final point, I'm by no means suggesting that this is an easy solution or the only solution. There are, in the data, some cause for hope, which is that where you can link the needs of the NHS, which are top of people's minds, as I've just mentioned, to the links of to the needs of social care as one and the same, because I mean they are, let's face it, in people's minds, then you really do start to get people's attention. So when prompted, the public do recognise the link between the two. That's an argument that could help you as we approach the general election. But that's more than enough for me for now. So with that, I'll hand back to the panel.
Thank you very much, Kieran. That was really, really, really helpful and really good, the way that you kind of took it down from the really big picture right then through down to the more minutiae detail around social care, which was really helpful. As you, I think, used the word yourself, somewhat pessimistic in terms of the kind of the overall challenge that we're facing, but some green shoots in there in terms of some perceptions around the need, the role that social care can play in alleviating some of the pressures in hospitals. But I think fascinating that underpinning misunderstanding between health and of what health and social care are and where the boundaries are between those two. So that was really helpful. So I'm going to come to Julia now from Unison to outline really just some of your reflections on what it is that you feel, Julia, can help us get social care more prominently on the political agenda. Julia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Karen. Wow, those are some of the fantastic statistics. It never even crossed my mind that people over 55, only 4 out of 10 can think of the future of their care in case they need it. Yeah, the truth is that sometimes it's very difficult. My name is Julia. I'm a Unison Vice President. I live in Manchester. I'm also a senior support worker in the community. So I kind of touch the two top and the bottom. So in between there, I can explain a few of the things. Most of them have been already said by Kieran, who is kind of well prepared, well organized. I've been doing that job for years. Before going to the care setting, I've been working in I've got experience, over 20 years experience in various community interest organizations, including 7 years in Refugee Action. I work in the community. I was a member. I work at a project called Lee Community Integration Project here in Manchester. I was a member of small funding for the panel in Lee voluntary sector. The reason I joined the healthcare or in the community, I think I was having that calling, that compassion. I realized that at some point, those people, they will need us. And working in the community really opened my eyes. And from there, I become activist, not only for the people we work for the people we work with, including the service user themselves. Those people have got no voice. They need somebody to amplify their voice. They've got needs. In some of the questions, somebody asked what could be the priority for the care. If a resident wanted, what could be a priority? What is a first consideration? I will say dignity. When you give somebody dignity in care, you will be able to give them the treatment is needed. You will be able to empathize with them. You will be able to show compassion, and that person will feel valued. Unfortunately, that is the things in our community to lack at the moment. Why? Because people are overstretched, overworked, underpaid. Kieran mentioned the election is coming. It does not mean like when Labour come in power, things will be easier. No, not at all. They will come. We're still going to challenge them. We're still going. My job as activists are always lobbies, the politician near the election. In Manchester, in Salford, we have already started. Our Salford city mayor, we know that Unison in Salford, they are the team who work hard for the healthcare setting to help increase more funding in the community, because it works hand in hand with what we receive and what can be provided. After the COVID, we campaigned for the care worker in Manchester to get COVID bonus. And that is the only place in Salford area where the care worker, support worker, did get that £632, the bonus, carers bonus. I didn't prepare much speech. My consideration on the care setting, I think we need to work with the government to continue putting more funding in the local community to try to organize as much as possible. It's difficult to trace where does NHS stop and where the social service get provided, because once discharged from the hospital straight away, go to the community, and the nurses still come and see those patients, the doctors still come and see those patients. So there is that interrelationship between the NHS and the care provider and the care and the service which is provided to the client in the community. Unison Vice President, you don't just sit on the top. We go on the shop floor. We go fight for equality. We go and fight for ethnicity pay gap. We make sure that people get better pay, sick leave, all the condition, term and condition, we fight for them all the time. So those are the things which, to me, become as a priority in the unison in general when you come fighting discrimination and so forth. I think I will stop there and then pass it to Abby. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Julia. That was really interesting. And I think bringing out that point about really ensuring that people in later life have that dignity and that there's a real focus on that in terms of how we construct services around them. And I think your other point about how we make sure that the money, the resource gets in at a local level and the interrelationship between health and social care at a local level is really important. And that it's going to be a continuing need to press forward with our argument, whatever shade of government there is after the next general election. So I'm going to come to yourself now, Abby, for your reflections on what Kieran said and also about the way forward in terms of how we get social care properly on the agenda and consider the way forward for improving and sustaining the services that we provide.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Julia, and of course, Karen. Oh, well, what a wonderful breakdown of the data analysis. Is such an eye opener for me to see the huge variance between the public understanding of where NHS and the social care sector sit is quite huge to see the variance. So, I mean, I'll just you've mentioned most of the things, Kieran, that I want to touch on whilst you're doing the statistics. But what really resonates with me listening to all of that is just brought back to me that the challenges that is encountered by services within the social care sector is linked to historic underinvestment and lack of sustained recognition and reward for the social care workforce. And I think the recognition of the public also of where social care stands shows within the stats that you brought up. I mean, one of the key challenges that we face within the sector is low pay and lack of professional status. Often do I have conversation with staff member from time to time, and you find out that things are really tough because of the underpayment. There are often the time struggle to staff members, colleagues struggle to pay rent, pay bills, even up until the point before the month runs out. Sometimes you find out some people have run out of money for transportation because because of the underpayment. So, I mean, we are lucky as an organization. I work for MHA, and MHA is an organization that does an annual review of the salary, and there's usually an uplift. These sort of incentives come a very long way for colleagues. Last year, we had a huge, what's called increment in terms of percentage, and it went a long way. Staff really received this very positively. As an organization, also, I'm also proud to say, it might sound a bit little, but us providing lunch to staff members to support them on a daily basis does go a long way. But other colleagues within the social care sector that are not able, or that the organization are not providing such intensive incentives to them, things are really, really difficult. Another thing that we find that we tend to, as a challenge within the sector, is recruitment and retention. There's high turnover very much lately. I mean, in terms of staff turnover, many use the social care sector as a temporal position or perhaps as a stepping stone to buy time, and they tend to exit to a more to a role that requires less requirement of what's it called they move to a role that does not require a lot of responsibility and accountability, as in regards to statutory accountability within the sector. So we found that we tend to struggle at times with retaining staff. And a lot of staff members that are very passionate within the sector are exiting as a result of these sort of issues and challenges that we are facing. And for example, I've been trying to recruit a chef for a few months now within the sector, and this has become a challenge. We find out that candidates that have come for the interview, rather sometimes, most of the time, they turn it down. They prefer to work for a chain, a catering chain, whereby the expectation is not as huge as that within the social care sector. From that perspective, I believe if action is not taken now, perhaps if the government does not put social care in the forefront of the agenda, staff retention could potentially continue to decline across the social care sector and increasing pressure across the system. Another challenge that we face presently is the funding and financial worries. As a manager, we constantly battle with the local authority to agree funding, because the central government, they receive funding cut from the central government, as we hear. The borough in which I presently operate has had huge amount of challenge with regard to funding, and for us to get appropriate or a decent funding in terms of weekly care rates usually is a challenge. I just give an example. Within Croydon, it will be difficult for us. We actually, like I mentioned, is a challenge for us to get a dementia care funding for about £825. That is what the local authority is willing to pay. And there's a huge variance between that and between the local authority funding and that of our private funders. So the variance is huge, and it's really difficult for us to be viable as a business. £825 does not go a very long way. I mean, that's about £117 approximately a night. Within that context, as a home, we provide accommodation, we provide utilities, we do provide special what's called sort of activities. We have chaplains provision, we do have music therapies provision and all that. So in a nutshell, the funding is an issue and is not actually, in most cases, financially viable for us. Unfortunately, there are times that would need to turn down local authority funding potential resident as a result of this. This sometimes can be challenging for us to do, but we just have to ensure sustainability of a service. And also, often at times that I tend to have conversation with elderly people, older generation within the care home, and they have huge amount of worry. They worry about their funds depleting. They worry about what happens if they run out of money. They worry hugely about they worry about leaving something for their children, because they believe they're putting all their funds into care. And they tend to worry that the social care sector is not getting the attention that is required from the government. They're worried that they're not getting the funding that the social care sector requires. And I mean, for the older people, it is a worry, and their loved ones especially. Often at times that we have conversation and they want this reassurance, constant reassurance that their parents would remain in the home. And for us, we are a charity organization, we're blessed to be so. And we do take that seriously into consideration. But then seeing the older people worry about funds, it's really heartbreaking for us as managers and social care providers. So, I mean, on that note, I would really put across strongly where possible and really advocate that the social care sector needs to be on the forefront agenda of the general election, because a strong understanding of the local community needs is required from that perspective for the government to drill down and actually know what the challenges are in that sense. But how can we achieve this is by us being in the forefront, and we're verbalizing, we're amplifying, for people to put this across as best as the whole can, so that 2024 election can showcase social care, can elicit, and our concerns and challenges can be heard. So finally, we need the government to ensure that people have access to the right care, the right place, and the right time, without the anxiety from older people or the worry from their loved ones for funding. How do they access social amenities and, standard things that need to be met? We need the government to look into that. And of course, Britain is an aging population. We all are gradually moving towards this part of it. So we really urge and we want to plead with the government where possible to put us in forefront. And can I just add finally, personally, I cannot overemphasize the need and the importance of reforming the healthcare social sector, like I've mentioned earlier. We need a focus on professional development. We need for the skills and expertise within the sectors to be recognized, so that the young ones coming forward will want to invest in the social care sector. We need skills, we need more trainings, we need qualification that will be recognized and that will be in line with the service we provide. So we'd like the government to look into this for us, and would like everyone to verbalize, amplify as best as we can to put this across. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Spoken with real passion. And also, I think just bringing into the conversation just the realities at what it's like actually delivering these services, the anxieties for the older people, the anxieties for the friends and family of those residents, but also then the pressures on the workforce as well. So, and the dynamic around local authority funding and the complexity of that. So thank you very much. So thank you to all three of our panelists. I've got some questions that have been coming in, some before and some during our time already today. And I'd like to come to you first, Kieran, with this question, and then pick it up with Julia and Abby afterwards. Social care has been in turmoil and recognized for the need to change for 20 years plus in terms of the challenges that we face, but without really any identifiable progress. It's a multi-party, a multi-government issue. What do you think is blocking it from the polling that you've done? Are there any things that are blocking it from really getting into the public consciousness? Is it all about the understanding of what it actually fundamentally is that people are getting, or do people not want to look at later life because of the mortality it brings to mind?
Thank you, Sam. Obviously a big question. I think on the substance of the topic itself, in my remarks, I mentioned I made a comparison with pensions, and I think there are similarities there in the sense that if you're someone who, I don't know, is in your 20s or 30s, getting that person to think about what care they might need when they're elderly, or the pension they might need, or other things like that, is very, very difficult, because people are, particularly at the moment, very focused on the cost of living and their job and their own day-to-day getting by as it is at the moment. So in an ideal world, everyone would have a wonderful sort of 20 to 30 year plan for what they want to do and everything. But for a lot of people, this comes through in our polling today, it's getting through the week or the month or the year that's particularly important. I think the politics of this is also a challenge too. In 2017, Theresa May obviously came out with a social care policy in that manifesto. And my role here is not to talk about the merits or otherwise of that policy, but you saw how difficult that became very, very quickly in terms of being a bit of a political football. And there is a risk with something so emotive and yet so often misunderstood that in an election campaign, it could go, the public debate around this could go south very quickly. And in many ways, maybe a general election campaign, therefore, isn't necessarily the best time to have some of those discussions. So look, if this was easy, there would be a solution already. Yeah. I suspect that if there is to be a solution, it will be something that's cross-party, where there is a consensus between the different sort of main political players at Westminster about the way forward. But as I say, obviously, if that was immediately forthcoming, it would have happened already. But obviously, hopefully, it does.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so I suppose kind of reflecting back to you, what I think you're saying is maybe the mileage is in trying to get social care on the agenda during an election, but not from your polling point of view, put it so front and center with the parties for themselves that actually what happens is it becomes a political football and then gets kicked into touch.
Well, I think to me, there's two, I was about to say obvious solutions, and I think there is an obvious solution. There's two ways it probably would work. Either there's a particular political party that gets a very large majority and is able to therefore do difficult things as parties with large majorities can, even if there are elements of them that are unpopular because they have that majority in parliament. So let's fast forward to now. The current polling suggests there could be a large Labour majority at the next election. I want to be very clear, we're not saying that's not a prediction, but the current polling points that could be an outcome. So if there was a large Labour majority at the next election, there would be the political sort of, if you like, leeway for a Starmer government to take on some of these issues. So in many ways, that's about not highlighting it in a general election, but then doing the work during a parliament, a Labour government. Or sort of related to that, it is that cross-party sort of effort where a lot of that discussion goes on in many ways behind the scenes, out of the public's eyes for a time, until there is a solution that's put forward that has broad sort of political consensus at Westminster. But listen, as I'm saying this out loud, it is incredibly difficult. And I just want to repeat, if it was that easy, it would have been done already. But I think there are many examples of where really, really difficult sort of political issues can be resolved on a completely different topic. Yeah, we've seen the restoration of the Northern Ireland Assembly this week. Obviously, a completely different topic and subject matter, but just shows how seemingly impossible issues can be, if not resolved, progress can be made. So we shouldn't be too downhearted, but obviously it takes political will on all sides to make that happen.
Thanks, Kieran. That's really helpful. Julia, just coming to you. What's Unison's perspective on why this is so hard to get into the mainstream of political debate and find a resolution?
Wow, that's a good question. Yes, I didn't expect that. The truth is that politicians don't leave their doors open. They always want to put an obstacle there, so we shouldn't see what is happening inside there. Our role, Unison as activists, is always to knock at the door when there is an issue. Without our pressure on them, we may not get the funding we needed for us to continue functioning in the care setting. So the idea of us pushing toward the politician with I wish there was an easy way that you just go and send the email and they open for you, they provide everything. But unfortunately, it's not like that. So we have to campaign and then organize until when we organize, eventually we win. Yeah, I hope I've answered the question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I suppose I'm also keen to know just Unison's position, because I know that it started to be talked about as having a national care service that kind of parallels and sits alongside the National Health Service. And I wondered if what Unison's view was about that, in terms of that maybe being something that people could more tangibly get behind.
Yes, that's correct. Unison have got a good policy when it comes to working with the politician in general, specifically with Labour. At the moment, we tend to listen to what they are saying, what they are proposing, in case they manage to win the election. But that does not mean that we will give them an easy ride, a soft to play, that we say, okay, we will sit and wait 100 years, you are in power, to see what you can do for us. So we have a good policy when come to work with the politician, especially for the Labour Party, and then we will wait there and see. Thanks.
Thank you. And Abby, what's your view on, having been working in the care sector for so long, do you have a view about what it is that is so intractable about this, that the politicians seem to struggle to get or feel able to take on as an issue in some of the ways that, Kieran, very ably described the difficulties that Theresa May had. And I think, I can't remember, I think it might become known as the dementia tax, that was kind of being mooted in terms of her plans. But do you have a view, Abby, about what really is the blocker on this?
Well, I feel personally that we're slightly been overshadowed by NHS. The social care sector is overshadowed by the NHS. I think perhaps that could be a blockage. I'm not able to stipulate firmly, but I just feel that we are overshadowed because NHS social care should technically work together, because like we've mentioned, the what's called the intercommunication, we are interwoven in a way, in the sense that if, for example, we talked earlier about discharging patient from the hospital, they go into social care, and that is where they do recuperate and they receive support, and other professionals, health and social professionals, will come into the community to support. So I think we should be viewed the same. I mean, COVID was an eye opener for us all during COVID time, that we were hugely overshadowed, if not for the voice of those, and of course yourself, Sam, that was out there that spoke for us, as at then we were overshadowed. I'm not able to stipulate why, but I just believe that it is time. If we're overshadowed, this is the time that we shouldn't be. Excuse me. This is a time that we need to make the move, that the government need to see us more for what we do and who we are. The NHS cannot entirely function without the social care. We are interwoven, we work together, and the better this is recognized by the government, the earlier it is recognized by the government, and for the general public as well, will be a beginning of a wonderful thing and a good thing for our future. We're moving towards, Britain is an aging population, like I said, and both work side by side. So I hope that answered the question, but I just feel we are overshadowed in a way, and this is a time for us to be out there and to get the recognition we truly deserve.
Sam, if I could just come in very, very briefly.
Yeah, sure.
I think if there's one message that I think the presentation I've given today we should leave people with, it's that as much as there is a misunderstanding of the sector with the public, as much as there is this overshadowing that Abby talks about quite rightly, there is a recognition, as I said at the end of that presentation, that fixing some of the capacity issues in the social care sector can also support the NHS, because the two things are interwoven, as Julia and Abby have so rightly pointed out. So, I do think there is some public recognition that the two solutions may be interlinked. So maybe that's a good place for the sector to start.
Thank you. I want to go round again with you on another question, and it's kind of partly touched on by Abby earlier on, but also it's got a fresh dynamic at the moment. Abby was talking about some of the challenges with local authority funding, and that being only a proportion actually of what the proper cost of care is. And there was a big government exercise done last year on that. Excuse me. But what we know is that there are an increasing number of local authorities who are virtually kind of declaring bankruptcy or moving towards that because of the extensive amount of pressure that there is on their budgets. And I wonder, Kieran, starting with you again, if you've done any polling around people's concern around that and the potential impact that there could then be, obviously in this context, particularly on social care, but more broadly in terms of a disintegration or a further disintegration of public service and the challenge that poses.
So just to make sure I understand the question, Sam, you talk about the relationship between local authority bankruptcies and social care, essentially.
Yeah, because, for example, if local authorities are really struggling, they've got a range of statutory services they have to support, but it's whether that then it breeds an increasing kind of press down on the amount that they will pay for those services.
Yeah, I mean, our polling does show, obviously extreme public concern about local government funding. And when you ask people what impacts your quality of life in your local area, people recognise the role that local councils play. Part of the issue when we talk about local authority funding, though, is that one of the least popular taxes out there is council tax. So I think what you quickly run into is, yes, there's public concern, but there is a question of where is the money coming from? And I suppose that is the problem for a lot of these issues, whether it's about social care, the NHS, local government funding, schools, and so on and so forth. It's kind of, there's a recognition of the problem. There's a sort of implicit understanding of I'll pay more tax to solve it, but then where is that money coming from?
Yeah, and I suppose it also sheds a light, doesn't it, on there is at the heart of this a real problem with central government understanding the dynamic around social care and in terms of the need to fix it. But that is so interlinked between central government and local government in terms of the way that would happen in terms of the funding settlements.
Yeah, I mean, I think if these were easy issues, then they'd be dealt with. They'd be dealt with already. But of course, I think again, it comes down to priorities, and I think, as Abby's pointed out, in some ways, social care is recognised as extremely important when you prompt people about it. But before you do that, people mention other issues as the most important day to day. And I think I would stress that point about the cost of living. This is the context in which some of these arguments have, some of these campaigns are taking place. Many people who are under the age of 55 are worried about the here and now and sort of getting through the week and paying their bills. So, getting them to think about the longer term is difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Julia, from a Unison perspective, in terms of those concerns about local authorities and their ability to support services in their area, what's the line that Unison's taking to try and ensure, I suppose, that there is a continuation of commitment to those services?
Yeah, recently in the area where I live, less than 4 miles, one of the nursing home is about to close down. They couldn't afford to pay their staff, and then they put a note on the door that we are going bankrupt. That was 29 January, which is literally last Monday. So we invited the mayor of the city to go there and try to campaign. He said, no. A week ago, you mentioned that you will pay your staff. He said everything was fine. And now you put a note that people, what they work on December, they couldn't get paid. This was January. Eventually, the council stepped up and then take the money out and pay the staff. Even though they give the money to the organization, still not all the staff did get the pay. So somehow, the management were not very much favorable to the staff member. As a Unison, what we try to do is to work closely with our politicians to try to make them understand that we need them, they need us, because at some point, all of us will need to go and we need the care. So everybody have to have access care at their point of need. One of our Salford mayor, the mom were working care setting. So the gentleman knows exactly what this challenge, the difficulty carers do face. So in that aspect, he kind of work closely with us. Every time we have a meeting, we invite him, always come. But when, as a Unison member, we want to lobby him, we forgot about that aspect. We go and eventually we get what we want. Just before I close, I was campaigning for the Foundation Living Wage in the UK. I successfully win in 2 consecutive years, Foundation Living Wage champion 2022 and 2023. Why? Because Unison in Salford, in Manchester in general, come to the point to realize that as activists, we need to work with the politicians to lobby them, to follow them. Rain, cold, snow, we stand behind them and they support us. Eventually we win. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it, about, you can campaign at a national level, but also it's that local activism that can yield such positive reward. Abby, I'm just going to come to you. There was a really interesting point that was just put into the Q&A, which was about, it was kind of reflecting on the power that the recent drama documentary on ITV has had in terms of the post office and in terms of the use of that story there, which has created such a level of action by government and by the post office in terms of trying to bring some resolution to that awful episode with the Horizon IT system. Do you think that's something somehow needs to be also woven in, that people maybe through something like that, through some sort of storytelling that actually does convey what social care really is all about, could help maybe shift some of the dial?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It will be an eye opener for a lot. And I'll go back to Karen's data and analysis and statistics as well, which I found very useful during this panel. And because there's huge variance and gap in people's understanding of between health and social health care and social care. So I think people telling the stories from carers, from support workers, from those in the front line, coming forward and telling the story will be a eye opener. It would give better perspective to a lot to the public and even to the government. I do understand and I appreciate that they're trying their best and they're working with the local authority. I mean, the central government working with local authority, and of course we have Unison and other union representatives as well working with them. But such true stories, true from the people from the front line, hearing from the horse's mouth, like I say, will be a huge eye opener, and also would create more what's it called, more awareness and of course influence policies where possible. I believe that will be the case. Just like we had during the COVID-19, because I was one of the representatives that spoke with on BBC News, reporting the true reflection of what we encountered in the front line during COVID-19. And I believe that resonates with a lot of people coming from us. I, as a social care professional, and also the doctors that were on the show, and they relayed their experience during COVID-19. I believe they will have the same impact that had if we were to go down that line. If I've answered your question, Sam.
Thank you. Yes, Abby, that's really helpful. I'm going to come around one last quick round from you all, and then you'll be released back to your day jobs. But I'd just really be interested to hear if you think, I mean, MHA has campaigning for a social care council, a bit like one of the Royal Colleges, to speak with a more united voice for the sector, so that there was a better understanding and we could continue to press for improvements around workforce and around the support that the sector needs. But I wonder, for each of you, start with yourself, Kieran, again, can you say from anything that you've done in terms of your polling, if there's any way that you think that the sector could get a more united voice, particularly as we head towards the election?
I guess in many ways that's for the sector to answer, because I wouldn't be an expert on the sort of any disagreements or divergence within it. But I think what it really is about, I think, is understanding that you're competing in a marketplace of issues around, as I've said, around the NHS, yes, where there are links, but also around the cost of living, immigration, and the economy more generally. And so getting your voice heard as a sector in that conversation is going to be difficult. So I think it's just about being as clear as possible what the ask is and why that will benefit the situation. Because I think when you prompt people, the research shows people do care, they recognize it's important, and they do see some hope for change. But it's about what the ask is going to be, beyond more money, or at least how that's going to be funded, amidst all the other priorities that the public have. Thanks,
Kieran. Julia, how do you think we can speak more with one voice for the sector? Sorry, you're on mute, I think, still, Julia.
Thanks. My message will go straight to the government. During the COVID, we were called frontline workers. We will also like all the carers to be the front line with the check pay. We want to see our check coming on the front when they are issuing the pay slip, that they've been working hard to recognize how hard work carers, they do work in the community in general. So if they can value our job, that will be fantastic. So people will work, continue. The government consider, in general, care worker, they are soft at heart. So the government get the kind of take it for granted that, yes, they will always continue to be soft. But if they can increase our paycheck, that will be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And finally, Abby, last word to you. How do you think that we could speak with more of one voice as a sector?
First of all, I would echo Julia there. Yeah, we want the paycheck to speak for what we do. Yeah, I think that's one of the key points. Financial incentives, I believe, should reflect what we bring to the table. It should be aligned. Yes, we are soft at heart. Yeah, because we're very caring people. We're very passionate, but we want that to not be taken for granted, but that rather to reflect in the incentives that we receive. And secondly, I would say also from my perspective, a social care council will be useful, like they have in Scotland and Wales. If we have that sort of thing in England, whereby this, I believe, would enhance recognition of social care workers. So we have a voice together. So if we are all under a council, we have a voice, we're registered. This would encourage and even attract more people to come into the workforce because of the recognition this will bring. And I believe with such, it would help amplify our voice more because we're coming as a collective unit. You see where I'm coming from. So I believe that also would help.
Great. Thank you very much, Abby. And thank you, all three of you, Kieran, Julia and Abby, for contributing so much to today's discussion. I hope people who have been kind of listening in have found it illuminating and it's thought-provoking. And particularly thanks to Kieran for the data presentation, which really helped to kind of provide a foundation for our conversation. I wish you all well, and I wish you good luck as we move forward in this election year to trying to really put social care on the front of people's minds in terms of kind of the policy shift that's needed, both at a national level, but also, as Julia said, very much at a local level as well. So thank you and have a good rest of your days. Thank you.